The late-night strategy sessions turned into stolen dinners that stretched well past midnight. Sure, we talk work, but it was the other stuff that got my heart pounding. The way he looked at me, like I hung the moon. How his voice got low and husky when he'd tell some stupid joke. God, my husband never made my knees weak like that. One night, after too many glasses of wine, we ended up at some swanky hotel bar. His hand brushed mine, not by accident, and that was it. I didn't even try to stop myself. That kiss in the elevator was like a bomb going off inside me. Clothes flew, it was sloppy, desperate, and the hottest thing I'd done in years. The guilt hit me like a truck the next morning. I swore it'd never happen again, but never turned into every other Thursday, then every Tuesday too. My excuses piled up. Client dinners, deadlines, the usual crap. My husband, clueless as ever, probably just thought I was working my ass off, which technically I was. It felt like playing with fire, but damn it, the fire felt good. My confidence soared. I started dressing better, feeling like a woman again, not just some high-powered robot. It was like all that boring routine with my husband had sucked the life out of me, and this affair, was jump-starting my heart again. It made me feel powerful, desired, alive, stupid, selfish, risky, yeah, all of it. But I couldn't make myself care. I began craving the thrill of it, those secret rendezvous planned down to the minute. Each stolen moment was adrenaline, pure and simple. He was like a drug, and I was seriously hooked. I'd walk into meetings at work, feeling those secret trysts buzzing under my skin, and nobody, not the clients, not my colleagues, and sure as hell not my husband, suspected a thing. The lies became second nature. I wasn't even a good liar before, but here I was, dishing them out with unsettling ease. I figured, hey, I might as well excel at something in this mess, right? The whole thing had a sick kind of thrill to it. The danger, the balancing act. It was messed up for sure, but my world, for the first time in a long time, was anything but boring. The thing about lies is they have a way of growing, taking on a life of their own. It started with, traffic was terrible, or this presentation is killing me. Little white lies to smooth over my late nights and sudden absences. My husband, God bless his naive soul, never questioned a thing. That made it worse somehow, like I was cheating on an idiot. It fed into this growing arrogance, a sense that I was smarter than everyone around me. But the guilt, it was there, a nagging buzz in the back of my head. I tried to drown it out. More dinners with him, wilder weekends, pushing every boundary I'd ever known. It was like I needed to prove something, either to him or to myself, that I could have this thrilling double life and get away with it, scot-free. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd end it soon, get back on track. But those stolen moments, they were a drug, pure and simple, and I couldn't get enough. Somewhere, deep down, maybe a tiny, still sane part of me knew this was a runaway train. But I was strapped in and enjoying the view too damn much to hit the brakes. Each stolen moment, each touch, each lie, it all added fuel to the fire, blurring the lines of what was real and what was make-believe. Going home, being the dutiful wife, it became a drag. A part one had to play. The disconnect was brutal. 1 minute, fireworks with my lover. The next, microwaving my husband's leftover dinner and pretending I cared about his day. The change must have shown on my face, because he started asking those lame husband questions. Everything okay? Hun? Or you seem a little distant lately. I brushed him off with half-hearted smiles and promises of date nights that never happened. He'd look at me with those concerned eyes of his, and for a flicker of a second, the guilt would threaten to crack my facade. But I buried it ruthlessly, telling myself he was too dumb to notice, too wrapped up in his stupid paintings to care about what his wife was really up to. The arrogance, that was my downfall. I see that now, thinking I could manage it all, keep the plate spinning and never slip up. Turns out, reality had a different plan. That plan was about to blow up in my face. It should have been obvious, the hushed phone calls at weird hours, the way he'd smile at his phone and tuck it away when I entered the room. But denial is a hell of a thing. And for a while I ignored the prickling unease, buried it under another layer of lies I told myself. Then one night he was asleep, phone on the nightstand, an unknown name flashing across the screen. I don't know what possessed me, maybe some twisted self-preservation instinct. I snatched it, thumb fumbling over the passcode I'd never thought I'd need to know. The messages were like a bomb going off in my hands. Sexy photos, plans for weekends away, promises that made my blood boil. It was all there, a sick, twisted reflection of my own affair. At first it was just shock, cold numbness spreading through me. Then came the rage, a hot, blinding fury that made me want to scream, to smash things. I wanted to hurt him the way he was hurting me. The confrontation was explosive. I threw the phone at him, the evidence splattered across his shocked face. I expected tears, apologies, pathetic begging. What I got was chilling. His eyes went hard, the warmth wiped clean away. "Well," he said, voice like ice, "now we're even. Aren't we?" It was like the floor fell out from under me. Gone was the bumbling husband, the clueless idiot I'd fooled for so long. This was someone else, someone calculating. I felt sick, stupid. Had he been playing me this whole time? Every touch, every stolen moment. Was it all a long con? The power shifted, the ground tilted beneath my feet. Suddenly, the fear cut through the rage. I was no longer in charge. I wasn't calling the shots. He saw right through me, saw the cheating, lying woman I'd become. Worse yet, he didn't seem to care about getting caught at all. It was almost like he wanted this. Every ounce of control I thought I had went up in smoke. I thought I knew who he was, who I was, who we were. Turns out I didn't know a damn thing. It started quietly, almost insidious. A snide remark from a friend I'd known for years. A concerned look during a meeting. "You sure you're okay? You seem distracted." At first I chalked it up to stress, the long hours. But then it escalated. Rumors swirling in the office. Erratic behavior, missed deadlines, emotional outbursts that never happened. I started finding files misplaced, clients giving me the cold shoulder. At home, things weren't any better. Bills mounting, credit cards mysteriously maxed out. I'd confront him. He'd play dumb, shrug it off, his eyes glinting with something cruel. I started questioning every purchase, wondering if I was actually losing my mind. It was a nightmare on a slow burn. Suddenly, everything I'd built was crumbling, and I couldn't figure out why. Then came her. Not some shadowy figure anymore, but a real woman, flaunted in my face. Dinners I wasn't invited to, weekends away that he lied about. Seeing them together, it shattered what was left of my sanity. The humiliation was unbearable. The knowledge that everyone was in on the joke except me. It was suffocating. His attacks were relentless. Every whisper, every raised eyebrow, every financial blow. It was orchestrated. They were dismantling me piece by piece. My once razor-sharp mind was fogged with paranoia. My career was in ruins. I was drowning in debt I didn't even create. "You need help," he'd say, all fake concern. "Maybe it's time to take a break." It took me far too long to realize help wasn't about getting better. It was about getting rid of me. People I trusted started looking at me with pity, questioning my every word. Was I just unstable like he said? Was there something fundamentally wrong with me? The doubt ate at me relentlessly. My friends drifted away. My colleagues treated me like some fragile ticking time bomb. He kept whispering that I was unraveling. And the worst part was, I started to believe him. My grip on reality was slipping out of my manicured hands, and he was the one tightening the screws. I should have seen the photos coming. Some blurry snapshot of me screaming on the street, or maybe passed out in a bar. But they were far worse. My face contorted in rage. Fake bruises painted on my skin. A shattered wine bottle in my hand. Staged scenes of madness. All designed to break me completely. He'd been documenting it all along. My outbursts, my moments of panic. Twisting them into something grotesque. They spread like wildfire. The internet, the local gossip rags, even my own colleagues emailed them to me. Just wanted to check in. Is everything all right? It was the final nail in the coffin of my reputation, and just like clockwork, the restraining order arrived. "For your own safety," the police officer said, a mix of pity and suspicion in his eyes. The psychiatric ward was inevitable. After all, what's crazier than accusing your sweet, upstanding husband of a diabolical plot that sounded ripped from a bad movie? The whispers, the sidelong looks from nurses, The pitying smiles from doctors. It eroded the last bits of my sanity. The only one who seemed unshaken was him. With every visit, he played the concerned husband. I just want you to get better, he'd croon. Get back to the woman I love. He'd talk about selling the house, liquidating assets. All done with a mournful smile, like I wasn't even in the room. It took me far too long to realize that every tear, every sleepless night, it was all a performance. He'd won. My money, my career, my freedom, even my sanity, stripped on away piece by piece. My entire life, the existence I'd built with such pride, had been meticulously erased. And the architect of my destruction sat beside my hospital bed, the picture of sorrowful concern. I wanted to claw his eyes out, scream the truth from the rooftops, but all I could do was stare at the ceiling, defeated. Checkmate. He played the long game, and I didn't even see the board. They thought I was broken. The sedatives kept the nightmares at bay, but they also blurred my thoughts, made me feel like I was sinking underwater. Days melted into weeks, the white walls and bland food becoming my whole world. Most of the time, I was a shell of a person, numb to his visits, numb to everything. Yet, under that haze, a flicker of something cold and clear lingered. Anger. And with anger came a stubborn spark of defiance. Every time he droned on, the picture of the perfect grieving husband part of me saw through it. There was a crack in the facade, just a glimpse. He'd miscalculated something, an overlooked detail, a lie that didn't quite fit. That tiny sliver of doubt became my lifeline. I started observing, listening. A kind smile from a nurse overworked to her breaking point. An orderly who'd linger a little too long when changing my sheets. Ordinary acts of human connection. Things I'd taken for granted before. Those fleeting interactions kept me afloat. They made me realize I wasn't completely alone in this nightmare. It was risky, but I began collecting breadcrumbs. A whispered word. A date I wasn't supposed to remember. I'd hide them under my pillow. Scribble notes in the margins of the magazines no one bothered to collect. Then, the miracle. I overheard nurses gossiping about a patient's forged financial documents. It was a different name, but my ears perked up. The puzzle pieces were starting to click. His lies were a pattern, not merely cruelty aimed at me. Maybe others had seen through his schemes, too. That's when I started talking to Edith, an elderly woman 2 beds over. Whispered conversations after lights out, sharing suspicions that we both thought were crazy. Her mind might have been muddled, but she recognized a predator when she saw one. Desperate times call for desperate measures. With Edith's encouragement, I found a lawyer. A long shot, yes, paid with the last bit of money hidden in a secret account he'd never found. She listened, a frown on her face, probably thinking I was just another psych ward delusional. But when I laid out the few clues I had, something flickered in her eyes. A spark of interest, or maybe just pity. It was a pathetic excuse for a plan. But fueled by rage, by the primal urge to survive, I started to fight back. My mind might have been a battlefield, but damn it, I wasn't going down without swinging. My lawyer, Sarah, was a bulldog in a cheap pantsuit. At first, I think she considered my case a lost cause, humoring me more than anything. But when I mentioned the offshore thing, something changed. An overheard rumor, a date whispered on the phone, a tiny breadcrumb he'd never thought I'd notice. Sarah started digging, and wouldn't you know she found it. Not just one, but a whole tangled web of hidden accounts. Money funneled away from legitimate investments in some convoluted scheme that even my broken brain struggled to follow. The thread was thin, tenuous, but it was there. Turns out his mistake wasn't cruelty, it was arrogance. The man documented everything. Spreadsheets of my emotional episodes conveniently dated just before big financial moves. Fake contracts with shell companies. The works. It was as disturbing as it was brilliant. He'd planned his exit strategy with the same meticulousness he'd used to destroy me, never thinking his victim would be the one to reveal it. The lover, well, turns out even mistresses have a conscience sometimes, especially when they find out they're not the only mistress, and they get demoted from future wife to side piece. I didn't even have to manipulate her. She came to Sarah's office, spilling the beans, faked romantic getaways that lined up with the account transfers. His cold comments about a crazy wife. The whole 9 yards. Once one crack in his perfect image appeared, it all started to shatter. The whisper network that had once condemned me flipped the script. Suddenly, those sidelong glances turned curious, then sympathetic. Reporters picked up the scent of a scandal. His carefully constructed persona fell to pieces, and the sight was strangely beautiful. But cornered animals are dangerous. Suddenly, I was warned about my car's brake lines being tampered with. My window smashed in the night. He sent me photos of my lawyer's kids, threats scrawled on the back. The control he'd lost in the public sphere. He tried to claw back through fear. He'd always underestimated me. He thought fear would break me, make me back down. Instead, every threat, every act of desperation, it turned into pure, seething rage. With Sarah and a team of investigators, I barely understood now on my side. I realized something. I wasn't the powerless victim anymore. He was the one who should be afraid. Courtrooms are cold, sterile places, all polished wood and harsh fluorescent lights. But that day, it felt like a battleground. Him, trying to look pitiful. A broken man brought down by a vindictive wife. Me, pale and shaking. My neatly rehearsed testimony feeling like ashes in my mouth. He was good. I'll give him that. His words dripped with regret, painting me as unstable, incapable of distinguishing fantasy from reality. There were tears, apologies aimed at the jury. It was a performance worthy of an award, and for a sickening moment, I doubted myself. Were they buying it? Then it was my turn. Every lie laid bare, every forged document, every cruel act I'd meticulously recorded. Sarah, God bless her, presented it like a well-orchestrated symphony of destruction. The money trail was undeniable, the witness statements damning. Watching him squirm was vindicating. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, the power shifted back to me. The neat mask he'd worn for years slipped, revealing the desperation underneath. He hissed threats at me across the room, eyes filled with a rage that chilled me even as it fueled my resolve. The verdict was a blur. Guilty. The words echoed in the room, taking shape form. Guilty of fraud, forgery, and yeah, they even threw in the emotional abuse charge for good measure. His composure shattered completely, replaced by something ugly and raw. The image of him being led away, sputtering and shouting, would stay with me for a long time. In the flurry of media attention and well wishes from unexpected corners, it was easy to get swept up in the illusion of victory. But under it all, the hollowness remained. Sure, I'd won the battle, but the war had left scars. He was broke, a social pariah, but the damage to me ran deeper. Therapy became my new obsession, unpacking the years of manipulation, the subtle ways he'd warped my reality. It was exhausting. There were new business ventures, a desperate attempt to fill the void he'd carved in my life. Trust didn't come easy. I'd see a kind smile from a stranger and flinch, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Then came the book deal. At first it seemed crass, turning my trauma into profit. But Sarah convinced me otherwise. It was a way to take control of the narrative, to ensure I wasn't just a victim in some salacious news story, but a woman who'd fought and survived. Writing it was brutal, reliving every lie, every betrayal. It ripped open barely healed wounds. But amidst the pain, a defiant strength emerged. It was my story, damn it, and no one, not him, not anyone was going to tell it but me. Moving on. It's such a neat little phrase, isn't it? Like you pack up your emotional baggage, toss it in the Goodwill bin, and walk off into the sunset. The reality, as anyone who's lived through hell knows, is far messier than that. Sleep didn't come easy. Nightmares were an old friend by then. But now they featured courtrooms and forged signatures instead of stolen kisses. Trust? That was a luxury for other people. People who hadn't had their entire world rigged to explode. Every man with a kind smile or a charming word became suspect. Were they just better at hiding the darkness beneath? The worst part was the loneliness. Friends who'd disappeared when the scandal broke started sidling back in. Whispers of always knew there was something off about him, lacing their apologies. It made my skin crawl. The ones who'd genuinely been fooled were no better. Their pitying glances. The awkward offers of blind dates that I wanted to scream at. Then came Linda. Turns out her perfect husband had been cooking the books too. We met at the courthouse of all places, both finalizing divorces. A flicker of recognition, a shared look of bitter understanding. And just like that, a strange, reluctant friendship was born. Slowly a small circle formed. Women and even a few men who carried their own scars from spouses who'd been masters of manipulation. It wasn't exactly a cozy book club, more like a battle-worn support group. But it became a lifeline. The advocacy thing came about by accident. Some reporter stuck a microphone in my face after a charity event, asking about turning personal pain into positive change. The word stuck. I started small. Local support groups, speaking at schools, sharing my story and all its ugly, unfiltered truth. The book deal had put me on a bigger stage with a platform that felt both exhilarating and terrifying. But the emails and letters that arrived daily were my fuel. Heartbreaking evidence that I wasn't alone. He hadn't completely vanished, of course. Letters from prison arrived. Rambling apologies laced with threats. Pathetic attempts to explain himself. Each one went straight into the fire. Word would filter through that he'd been spotted. Bagging groceries, head down. A shadow of the man who'd orchestrated my ruin. I'd feel a jolt of ugly satisfaction, then disgust, mostly at myself. Yet, the truth was, no amount of time or therapy could completely erase the mark he left on my soul. There's this scene in the book, the heavily edited, polished version for public consumption, where I dramatically burn his letters. Makes for a good visual. Wronged woman. Casting off the chains. All that symbolic jazz. Truth is, I don't burn anything. They're stacked in a shoebox, tucked under my bed. Sometimes, late at night, I reread a few lines, then force myself to put them away. It's like picking at a scab. Painful, but morbidly satisfying. Regret's a funny thing, don't get me wrong. The affair itself, that was stupid. Reckless. But there's another level of regret that gnaws at me. The kind that surfaces in those quiet, sleepless hours. How could I have been so blind? Not just to his manipulation, but to my own vulnerabilities. The weaknesses that made me a prime target. The arrogance of thinking I was untouchable. That's what led me down this path. It'd be comforting to paint myself as an innocent victim, to pin the blame entirely on him. But that's a lie too. It takes two to tango. And even broken, I played my part. Were the choices I made monstrous like his? Hell no. But they were choices nonetheless. And that complicity sits heavy in my stomach. People keep asking about forgiveness. Talk show hosts with concerned eyes. Friends with well-meaning platitudes. The truth? I don't know if I'll ever forgive him. Forgiving myself might be a higher mountain to climb. He broke me, yeah, but I let him get close enough to do so. That realization is far harder to grapple with than any act of cruelty he inflicted. I've learned a thing or two, though, mostly about myself. The ugliness, yes, but a kind of strength, too. It's a strength forged in the fire he lit. A defiance hard won, and tinged with bitterness. But I endured. I'm changed. Probably not always for the better. That carefree. I want a divorce. I can't take it anymore. At my words, James showed a look of surprise. For a wife to say such a thing to him was intolerable, and his expression slowly turned to one of anger. Being the CEO of a company, he has a lot of pride. Yet he lacked responsibility and the ability to reflect on his actions. His attitude negatively impacted both our home and his company. Scoffing, James looked down on me, showing no sign that he thought his words were irresponsible, even though 2 of those kids were from his previous marriage. But it doesn't matter if they're biologically mine or not. All 4 of them are my precious children. All right. No matter how hard it might be, I was determined to raise them myself. After we divorced and moved to our new place, James suddenly showed up. Why did this happen to me? Watching James in his distraught state, I couldn't help but silently laugh. Finally realizing, enjoy, I thought. From now on, you're going to reap what you've sown. My name is Lydia, 34 years old. I'm a stay-at-home mom in a bustling household with my husband and 4 kids. Our children are eldest son Michael, 15, eldest daughter Sophia, 14, second son Jack, 8, and younger daughter Ava, 6. They're growing up fast, eating well, playing a lot, and thriving. Sure, They argue from time to time, but they get along great, and our home is always filled with laughter. James, who's now 39, is the CEO of a manufacturing company, and we remarried 9 years ago. Actually, Michael and Sophia are from his previous marriage. They're his stepchildren. His previous wife passed away 12 years ago. James had a good fortune to be greatly favored by Mr. Wilson, a major shareholder in his company. I've never met him, but he has been mentoring James, introducing him to business contacts and so on. Their friendship began when they met at a bar. Back then, James had just remarried me and was looking to expand his business. Learning of James's ambitions, Mr. Wilson bought shares in his company, enabling James to grow it further. Life is truly unpredictable. Ever since, Mr. Wilson has been a great support to James and his company. I met James when I worked as a receptionist at one of his business associates. My first impression of him was, what a refreshing CEO. He had a lovely smile and always made it a point to greet the receptionist with a, "Take care," as he left. Looking back, that was when I found James most attractive and likable. James began to change after our marriage. As his company started to grow, he became arrogant and began taking people for granted. This was evident both at home, with me doing all the household chores, and at his workplace with his employees. Stay-at-home moms have it easy, huh? You probably can nap in the afternoon, right? Excuse me? Preparing meals for 6, packing lunches for the kids, doing laundry twice a day, cleaning, shopping. Where in the world does he think I have any downtime? On top of that, James never helps around the house. Sophia is prepping for high school entrance exams, and Ava, being 6, still needs a lot of assistance. Michael comes home late from soccer practice every day, and Jack often asks for help with his homework. I wish James, being the father, would lend a hand. It sure would make things easier. I've told him several times that just bringing money home doesn't make you a father. What are you talking about? I'm exhausted from work, you know? That's why I'm providing enough money for the household, right? Just a little effort would help. Like helping Michael with his homework, we're advising Sophia about her college applications. When I get home, Michael's already asleep, isn't he? And as for Sophia, she'd probably find it easier to talk to her mother than her father. Fulfill your responsibilities as a mother, okay? You're the one not fulfilling your duties as a father. I slammed the table in frustration. He spends his nights out drinking, and on his days off, he's playing golf. He can't blame work for coming home late, and he's not home on weekends because he's out having fun. Why don't you work then? I can stay at home if you want, but make sure you bring in the same amount of money. If you can't, then don't act so high and mighty. And yet, he always blames everyone else. Lately, even the kids have started to avoid him and don't even attempt to make conversation. But James probably hasn't even noticed, and I doubt he feels lonely. It felt like he couldn't care less about the family and the kids. And if you thought he'd be more committed to his job in return, that didn't seem to be the case either. Every evening, he'd just rant about his employees. Seriously, there's a lot of incompetent people these days. To which I responded, don't say things like that. If there really are that many people struggling, why not provide additional training or change the way you mentor them? Huh. James scowled deeply, shaking his head as if to say I didn't understand. Training costs both money and time. I can't spend resources on those who can't do their jobs. But in the long run, that investment will pay off for the company. After all, it's the people who keep the company running. I couldn't believe that a company that didn't value its workers could ever truly succeed. And also, I put the expansion project in the hands of the department head, and it ended up failing. So I demoted him. At James' words, I blurted out, "What?" In disbelief, I looked back at James' face. That was your idea, wasn't it? You're the one who said the new project would definitely succeed. Ugh, stop it. He's the head of that department, not me. Regardless, you agreed to it, and it's not solely his fault, right? Every decision in the company is your responsibility as the CEO. That's what being a CEO is about. Don't act like you know about running a business when you don't. He'd always get defensive, refusing to listen to anyone's opinion or reflect on his actions. And eventually, even Mr. Wilson started to caution him. Why is even Mr. Wilson on my case now? I haven't done anything wrong. It's all because of these incompetent people. Apparently, He had requested Mr. Wilson for additional funding by issuing new shares, but he was turned down. I heard he was told that the company could go under at this rate. It makes sense. Mr. Wilson isn't investing just for fun. No matter how fond he is of James, he's not going to blindly fund reckless ventures. James needs to reflect on his actions and rethink his management style, but he stopped listening to both me and Mr. Wilson. Mom, look at this. One day, after returning from high school, Michael handed me his smartphone. On the screen was a video of James entering a hotel with a young woman, their arms linked together. I was coming home from practice and saw Dad walking with this young lady. I followed and I was so filled with rage that tears began to flow. He fails in his responsibilities to the company, as a father and as a husband. What a pitiful man. I knew it wasn't right to cry in front of my son, but the tears wouldn't stop. Michael kept patting my back in an attempt to comfort me. I'm sorry, Michael. I might divorce your father. That's fine, Mom. It's your decision. But what about Sophia and me? I looked up, realizing Michael, who had grown taller than me, was genuinely concerned. Silly boy. I stretched on my toes, ruffling Michael's hair. If you guys are okay with it, of course, you'll live with me. Looking down at me, Michael smiled happily. We might have some financial troubles, but, as I wiped away my tears, Michael interrupted. That's okay. We'll manage. Why do you think so? Because I know you won't abandon us. With a certain confidence, Michael smiled. Immediately, I hired a private investigator to gather evidence. It turned out the woman was an employee at James' company, and the two of them had been seen entering hotels multiple times. A week passed, and I told the kids about my decision to divorce James. By that time, I had made up my mind, intending to get custody of the kids if they wished to live with me. James came home late again that night, without a hint of guilt. As he cheerfully began to remove his tie, I showed him the photos Michael had sent me. I can't bear it anymore. We're getting a divorce. I laid out the evidence photos, and James looked shocked. Slowly, his expression turned to one of anger. I guessed his pride wouldn't let him accept being confronted this way by me. He scoffed. Fine. You raise the 4 kids. Don't expect any child support or alimony. With a dismissive laugh, James made it clear he felt no responsibility. But that was already my intention. No matter the hardships, I had decided to raise the kids myself. Okay. I looked straight into James' eyes and nodded. I'd work as hard as needed for the kids. They'd be far better off with me than with such a man. The next day, Mom, there's someone I want to introduce you to. While I was tidying up the house, Michael and Sophia came home with an elderly man. He seemed to be about 70, introducing himself with a gentle smile. It's a pleasure to meet you, Lydia. My name is Wilson. Wait, Mr. Wilson, as in? Yes, the major shareholder of James' company. I appreciate all you've done for us. I puzzled by this unexpected introduction. Why would Michael and Sophia bring Mr. Wilson home? Did they know him? Noticing my confusion, Sophia chuckled softly. Looking at me, she revealed. Actually, he's our grandfather. What? All 3 of them laughed at my stunned reaction. So, let me explain. Mr. Wilson began. I am the father of James' first wife. I divorced when my daughter was very young. I've always been focused on my work. Mr. Wilson had consistently paid child support even after his divorce. However, he never met or communicated with his daughter directly. He was completely dedicated to his job and didn't remarry. But after retiring and having some downtime, he began to wonder about his daughter. He wanted to see if his grown-up daughter, whom he knew nothing about, was leading a happy life. When he hired a detective to find out about her, he learned that both his daughter and her mother had passed away. Yet, Mr. Wilson found out about his grandchildren and that they were now being raised by his daughter's husband, James. He thought of introducing himself and offering support if James was raising them alone. However, it was right around the time James and I got remarried. That's why I hid the fact that I was his first wife's father when I approached James at the bar. I learned that he was having financial troubles with the company, so I offered to help. Mr. Wilson explained. So meeting in the bar wasn't by chance. Exactly, he replied. Apparently, about 3 years ago, he approached Michael and Sophia on their way home from school and told them he was their grandfather. Since then, they had been in touch quite often. Michael told me about your divorce. At first, I was thinking of just offering some financial assistance. He trailed off, gazing at me thoughtfully. Michael also told me about James having an affair with an employee and what he says about them at home, and how you've responded to all of it. He probably learned about James blaming and speaking ill of his employees. I've been aware of the complaints against James from his staff for some time now. I hoped he'd come around, but I've been pretty disappointed in him. Hearing your employees being badmouthed, especially regarding an affair with one of them, is quite unsettling. Especially blaming your subordinates for your own mistakes, that's not what a leader does. Mr. Wilson himself had run a business. He certainly had a strict perspective on what's expected of a company's president. That said, Lydia, I have a request for you, he said, looking serious. It took about a month to get everything set up. After the divorce, Mr. Wilson helped us purchase an apartment. It's a spacious place with 4 bedrooms, enough for the kids to live comfortably. Thanks to Mr. Wilson covering the down payment, I felt incredibly grateful. I can't thank you enough for all you've done. No worries, Lydia. You're going to have to work hard from here on out, Mr. Wilson said with a warm smile. The kids were really helpful with the move, making the transition smooth. A few days later, in the middle of the day, the doorbell rang persistently. It kept ringing incessantly, and then there was loud, urgent knocking on the door. Checking the security camera, even though it's a secured apartment building, I saw James right at the entrance. How do you know where I live? How did you get in? I hired a detective and found out. Open the door. Excuse me? I'm not letting you in. The moment I turned off the monitor, the knocking intensified. Please, open up. I reluctantly opened the door to avoid disturbing the neighbors, but had no intention of letting him in further. So, what do you want? Standing firmly at the doorway, I crossed my arms and looked at James. There's a shareholder meeting coming up. You still have shares in my company, right? Yes, I do. So? They're discussing my removal as CEO. Of course I knew. I had received the meeting notice detailing the agenda. James, losing his composure, pleaded. Oppose it for me. I wondered what was going through his mind. Was he desperately approaching each shareholder like this? I can't get in touch with Mr. Wilson. James was frantic in front of me. Is even Mr. Wilson trying to remove me? Why am I facing this? Inside, I couldn't help but laugh at the sight of the distressed James. Did he finally realize? If he thought he could still get help after ignoring all of Mr. Wilson's advice, he was really naive. Holding back my laughter, I responded with an indifferent face. Who knows? But my answer is clear. I'm in favor of your removal. Seeing James' face filled with despair, I told him to leave. Also, just a piece of advice. No one would want a CEO who abandons work to do this kind of thing in the middle of the day. I thought to myself, this will be interesting. From now on, you'll be facing the consequences of all your past actions. On the day of the shareholder meeting, James appeared at the venue with dark circles under his eyes, looking weary. I greeted Mr. Wilson, but Mr. Wilson only returned the nod with a stern face. The moderator started the meeting, and the proceedings got underway. The shareholders were abuzz with the news of James' potential dismissal. Some even called for James' immediate removal, but Mr. Wilson opposed it. We need him to understand why this is happening. James, looking at Mr. Wilson, was on the brink of tears. He couldn't fathom why someone who had always been kind to him would say such things. The reasons for the dismissal. Mr. Wilson began reading from documents detailing James' misdemeanors. Based on complaints from employees, researched over a month, reports, and testimonials. We have recorded audio, and some incidents are on security footage. You're so incompetent. Is that why the performance is bad? James' recorded outbursts echoed in the hall. The content was unbearable, even denying the personalities of the other party. On the large screen, a video showed James hitting an older male employee's head with a bundle of papers. The shareholders frowned. It wasn't just bad-mouthing his employees at home. James had been abusive at the company. This was his comeuppance for becoming arrogant, thinking he was favored, and not heeding Mr. Wilson's warnings. It's not true. They kept bringing up requests and opinions without showing results. James stood up, desperately trying to defend himself. Yet, as expected, voices criticized. Did you really need to go that far? striking with a bundle of papers. But the current audio and footage are malicious. Yes, I was framed. James claimed it was odd that the voice recordings didn't capture what was said before he began shouting. He asserted in front of everyone that they selectively reported only the parts that favored their argument. Even in the footage, there's no sound. You don't know what sort of rude things that employee said to me, do you? No one was inclined to take James' side at face value. However, some did voice that if they were going to dismiss him, they wanted to ensure everything was done fairly. Looking at a slightly relieved James, Mr. Wilson and I exchanged glances. The more James resisted, the more evidence we present. James seemed unaware he was digging his own grave. Let's hear from him then. The former head of the planning division spoke. After the new venture that the CEO wanted failed, I was demoted. Even though he had followed every directive, he was made responsible when things went south. That's not true. You failed, not me. Don't put this on me. In response to James' rebuttal, the former head repeatedly stated, I simply followed instructions. Clenching his fist in frustration, when I looked back in surprise, all eyes were on me. Lydia is the former wife of our CEO. Could you repeat here what you told him? Prompted by Mr. Wilson, I stood up. Yes. The CEO is responsible for everything in the company. That's what being a CEO means. Mr. Wilson nodded. I feel the same way. And many shareholders nodded in agreement. Wait, I may have demoted him, but I didn't fire him. The company, meaning me, bore the losses. Just for that, do I deserve to be dismissed? James didn't show a hint of remorse. That was the main issue, but it seemed James hadn't learned. Mr. Wilson interjected. There's more. James exclaimed. There's more? Yes, there's more. Then, on the screen, a picture was displayed showing James entering a hotel with a female employee. What? James, in shock, lunged at me. Several shareholders restrained him. Lydia, you showed this to Mr. Wilson? Mr. Wilson promptly responded. No, she didn't. James quickly responded to Mr. Wilson with a puzzled, huh, but, other than Lydia, who could it be? This was taken by my grandson, Michael. What did you say? Grandson? Michael? James was shocked, raising his voice in disbelief. Mr. Wilson smiled and nodded. If I tell you Michael and Sophia are my grandchildren, would you understand? James' eyes widened, and he sank to his knees. So all this while, the one who's been supporting me was. Because my daughter was in your care, and you were raising my grandchildren. I believed in you. But you've changed. Just because I told Lydia to raise those kids, my life's over? It's because of your true character. James crouched on the floor, clutching his head, and began to sob. Now, everyone, the woman in the photo that caused the CEO's divorce is an employee of our company. This means the CEO made advances on an employee while he was still married. With his forehead still on the floor, James kept muttering, Stop it. Please stop. Do you think he's still fit to be the CEO? With Mr. Wilson's words, the unanimous decision was made to dismiss James. After James was let go, I took on the role of CEO. Mr. Wilson valued the suggestions I had made earlier, like training for those who can't keep up with the work and trying different mentoring techniques. He wanted to see me in a leadership role. Some other shareholders also took a liking to me, and with the help of the employees, I've been working hard as CEO. James and the woman he cheated with found it too awkward to stay and left the company. I demanded compensation, so James had to sell his house. Apparently, after being forced to leave the company and the revelation to her parents, the woman broke up with him, hurling insults. As for us, we're living happily as a family of 5 in an apartment. On days I work late, Mr. Wilson comes over to watch the kids. Jack and Ava are equally fond of him, and they love spending time with Mr. Wilson. Michael and